Hello, one and all. Welcome to another episode of MMA Vision Analysis. This one, I'm here to talk about Israel Adesanya after UFC 305. What's next for Adesanya? That's what I'm here to talk about in this video. But before getting started, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, click that notification to get all of this that is new from this channel, your channel, the one and only MMA Vision Analysis. There's one thing that Dricus, current middleweight champion, said before the night of UFC 305 that still rings in my head. And he said something along the lines of, he's not sure why Adesanya is still fighting after he seemingly have reached the pinnacle. These words for me are something that's still ringing in my mind. And obviously, this is hitting home even more now that Adesanya lost the night of UFC 305. There's a bit of hindsight effect in play here. But there's a lot of truth in that statement. Why does a guy keep fighting after he seemingly reached the pinnacle? And then some. Adesanya have done things in the octagon that no fighter can ever or has ever done before, and maybe things similar nature will happen in the future. Stylistically, one of the most entertaining fighters that have ever stepped foot in the octagon. I think he came to the UFC at a pretty good age. I want to say Izzy was, 30, 31, 32 when he came to the UFC. Dominated pretty much from the get-go. Became champion of the middleweight division, lost title and reclaimed title, challenged for the light heavyweight title, fell short to the light heavyweight champion, that time Blachowicz. It takes nothing away from Izzy. I said it immediately after UFC 305, Izzy could retire right now. There's nothing that could be lost in terms of legacy. A matter of fact, I'm going to go as far as saying at this point, every time Israel Adesanya steps a foot back in that octagon, there is a risk of tarnishing the legacy and going almost in the same category as a Tony Ferguson and Anderson Silva and so on. Fighters that have stayed in there for too long. Let's take great examples. Let's say George St. Pierre, Khabib Nurmagomedov retired at the absolute peak of their performance, whether it be George St. Pierre coming back to beat Michael Bisping to claim that same middleweight champion that we're talking about here, something spectacular only George St. Pierre can do. Retired immediately after, and obviously Khabib Nurmagomedov retiring undefeated. I do understand that that's not the case for Izzy. He's been defeated. He's had wars inside of that octagon. Going back to those statements from Dricus, why does a guy still fight after he seemingly reached the top? Now, I can perhaps answer this question. There are two different ways of looking at this. There's a logical way of looking at it, and the logical way is that Israel Adesanya is in that gym. He feels good. He's beating up his sparring partners, and he still feels like he has a lot left in the gas tank. In all honesty, that did not look like that was the case the night of UFC 305. I can say, just judging by, have seen other Adesanya fights and seen Izzy at his best, I don't think night of UFC 305 Perth, Australia, August 17th, 2024 was one of the Israel Adesanya's best performances. Matter of fact, that was one of his worst performances. First time he's ever been submitted in the UFC, if I'm not mistaken. This is not to discredit Dricus. We have to give that guy his credit. At this point, everybody's pretty much saying the same thing. That style, looking at it, you would think that Izzy would have a field day picking that guy apart. That's not the case, obviously. Dricus implemented some takedowns, which were extremely effective against Adesanya and against Strickland as well. That was very effective. But against Izzy, it was more effective because he came on top. He came out on top with a submission, obviously. Not to discredit current middleweight champion Dricus, but I don't think peak Adesanya would have lost to Strickland that easily. Maybe the possibility is still there. Yes, Izzy has never really been the guy to grapple, even though takedown defense is pretty good. But at some point, these guys that wrestle, they're so relentless with their takedown attempts. They're just going to keep trying to take you down, and eventually they will take you down. They're so relentless at what they do. Even when Dricus seemed like he was tired, that was not the case. The guy is very difficult to get a read on. Let's just get that out the way. That style, it's going to be very awkward to beat. It's gonna take somebody just as awkward as Dricus to defeat Dricus. It's just that style is very, very difficult to get a read on. When the guy seemed like he was getting tired, he started shooting for takedowns. So it's and he's very smart. I mean, now there's a couple fights that I've actually really paid attention to Dricus. The guy is extremely calculated. In the Strickland fight, the guy was shooting for a takedown the last minute of every round. Go back and watch that fight. He was shooting for a takedown last minute every round. Extremely calculated. Effectively, that's how he won the fight against Strickland. Obviously, against Adesanya, he was able to submit the guy. Izzy, where does Izzy go from here? Is Izzy listening to his logic, or is Izzy listening to his ego? Is it ego pushing Izzy back in that octagon? It's very difficult for me, being a huge fan of Adesanya. Not the only fan. Obviously, I'm a fan of mixed martial arts, generally speaking, especially Izzy, because thanks to this guy, the sport is growing and has grown. I believe Izzy made a lot of people fans of mixed martial arts in general, not only the UFC and himself. So that's something that has to be said. Like I said earlier, every time Izzy re-enters the octagon at this point, and I don't want to go into the results, let's say every time he enters that octagon, there is a risk of tarnishing the legacy. There is a risk of hurting the brand that is Adesanya. At this point, I don't think there's much loss. He's lost to two great champions, Strickland and Dricus. But there's some serious consideration that has to be made by Adesanya in his camp in regards to his future. Because I do understand, the idea of reclaiming that championship and then retiring. I do understand that is a very, very attractive idea, but in all honesty, this is easier said than done. You can only, I think, be judged based off your last performance, even though previous performances are not indicative of future ones. That's also something that has to be said. If there's anybody that can bounce back, it is Izzy. So there's many, many different angles of looking at this, but I think Izzy's the biggest, he has the biggest task in his hands. Does he want to go back in there against hungry fighters that have a lot to prove, fighters that want the same spot that he's already reached, and some of them will never ever reach the heights that he's reached? Does he want to go back in there with guys that are that hungry when he's already had it all? What is there left to prove for Izzy? Is it logic speaking when he goes back in there, or is it ego speaking? Because if it's the latter, I'm afraid that Izzy's going to go down the same road as a Tony Ferguson and Anderson Silva. I hope that's not the case. If you made it this far, I appreciate you for sticking around. Please let me know what you think in the comments and subscribe for more.